Hey everyone, welcome to my first official Draw With Me video. Today I'll be drawing kawaii style versions of different foods I found on Pinterest, and I'll be using 2 different watercolor notebooks as well as some watercolor pencils that were sent to me by Arrtx to be reviewed. Full disclosure, I've only done watercolor a few times, and I've only used colored pencils a handful of other times in my art, so my imposter syndrome was definitely kicking up hard while testing out these products. This watercolor notebook that Arrtx sent me is so adorable, but since it's a bit small, I decided to test it out with just one little cat cheeseburger, and then I'll be doing a larger collaboration of multiple sweet desserts in my larger watercolor journal. And here are the reference photos that I found on Pinterest to come up with this cat burger. I was originally going to test out these watercolor pencils in my bullet journal, but after researching how to use them, I discovered how important it is to use watercolor paper to get the best results. So for that reason, instead of doing my usual plan with me video to test these, I've decided to create a draw with me video since I saw many of you said that you were open to seeing those on my channel. I'm beginning to lay down the color for the top bun of this burger here. Watercolor pencils don't contain wax as the colored pencils I'm used to do, so they lay down much rougher and scratchier. And I'll be using a water brush to activate the watercolor pencil. The watercolor pencil set did come with a small paintbrush, and it's rather nice, but I did some tutorials to learn how to use these watercolor pencils, and I found that the water brush worked much better for me because it provides consistent water flow. I quickly learned that part of the trick with these watercolor pencils is finding the right ratio of water. Too much will over-dilute and wash out the pigments, but if there isn't enough, the colors might not blend well and end up streaky looking. Sometimes the water brush put out a bit too much water, but overall I found it convenient to blend the colors and not constantly have to keep dipping my paintbrush into water and try to find the perfect water ratio each time. Although I did learn with a traditional paintbrush that a great way to get a good water ratio is to dip your brush into water and then lightly brush off some of the excess water on the back of your hand. And that seems to provide a great water ratio for the pigments. That might sound a bit strange, so I'll leave some links below to a video I watched explaining that better, and a Skillshare class that helped me familiarize myself a little bit with these watercolor pencils. I feel like I've barely scratched the surface of what there is to learn, and I definitely want to practice a lot more with these because they're a really fun medium. Since I didn't fully know how to use these, everything you see here is me experimenting with them. I played around with 2 different techniques in this video. For this cat burger drawing, I laid down one single color for each item and then activated it with water. Then after the first layer of color dried, I colored it again and added in the shadow layer with a darker pigmented color. On the next set of drawings, I'll be laying down the color and the shadow color together before adding water and making color blends out of them that way. When I was first testing out these watercolor pencils, I preferred this first way of creating blends and found that I got the smoothest results layering down each color and letting it dry before putting down another color. However, while I was creating the drawings for this video, I actually found that I got better color blends by coloring everything together at once on paper and then adding water to blend it all, like how I'll be doing for the upcoming dessert drawings. I think that both techniques can be useful, and it might just come down to the subject you're painting and also the specific colors you're using, which I'll touch on more a bit later. It seems like different situations and colors sometimes call for different techniques, and that's where a lot more practice will be needed from me to figure out what the best technique is for each thing that I happen to be painting. It's kind of fun though. I felt a bit like a detective trying to figure everything out. There's also an art to figuring out how much pigment to lay down. If you lay it down really heavy, then the colors of course will be more saturated, and if you don't lay the color down dark enough, then you can barely see the color at all when water is added. So I was definitely experimenting with that here and learning how to best blend the colors into a somewhat smooth shadow. You can see I keep adding water and moving the pigment around to try to create a smoother blend and shadow. This is tricky for me as well because I often like to do cell shading where my shadows are very abrupt and flat rather than being gradually blended into the item in a more smooth or realistic way. So I learned in that Skillshare class I watched that watercolor pencils are more accurately water-soluble colored pencils. Watercolor pencils have a different binder from watercolor paints, so while they're similar in some ways, they're also quite different in other ways. The pigments in these colored pencils allow for them to be moved around for quite a while. You can push them around a bit and even pull them off the page to some extent by adding more water or blotting them with a paper towel. So I think in some ways these can be quite forgiving in that you don't have to work super quickly and you can easily layer them or remove some of the pigment if needed. I tried a whole lot of different techniques and really didn't feel rushed or like anything I did was too permanent. There are a lot of ways to clean up mistakes and also keep layering colors on if you don't quite get it pigmented enough the first time. Actually, looking back, now that it's been a couple of days since I colored these and I'm just recording the voiceover now, I'm amazed by how much I learned from doing these few drawings, and I feel much more equipped for the next time that I use these watercolor pencils. But it was quite challenging for me in this video, and my imposter syndrome was kicking up because I'm not a watercolor artist or even a colored pencil artist. I think I have a long way to go before being able to say that I even remotely understand how to use these well, but I can also say that I'm really looking forward to playing with them again, and the intimidation I first had of them has definitely gone away. And now let's take a closer look at the items that Arrtx sent me. As usual, their packaging is absolutely gorgeous, and this set contains 72 watercolor pencils, and you can see a representation of the colors on the back here. The top of this packaging pulls off, and inside there's a color swatch chart. It's on some thicker paper. I don't know if it's watercolor paper, but it handled the paints pretty well. Though not as well as the actual sketchbooks I used, which are both 300 GSM and 100% cotton. And I'll show you what this looks like filled out in just a little bit. Here is the cute little paintbrush that I mentioned, which is included with the set. It's a small, round, pointed-tipped brush, and I did enjoy using it in the beginning until I realized that the water brush pen was actually much easier for me. It was like having training wheels for learning how to use this new medium. Though I am excited to be able to use this paintbrush for my watercolor paintings because it's a nice small size. The base of this kit folds out into 3 sections, and the layout seems great at first, but it's missing one thing in my opinion, and that is a divider between each row of pencils, and so I created one myself with some cardstock. Without it, the pencils kept getting mixed up, and I found it really challenging to find the specific color number I was looking for when they would get out of order. So this divider was really helpful in keeping them organized numerically. These colored pencils have gold printed words, and the ends are dipped, which as you may know, I love, and they all come pre-sharpened with the color number on the end here. And here is the little watercolor sketchbook that they gave me. It's 100% cotton, hot press watercolor paper, and really beautifully designed. As you can see, this pattern is super cute and matches the watercolor pencil box in a way, but with a different color scheme. And the back is a beautiful gold color. You probably can't see it on camera, but there are little sparkles in the color which are super pretty. The paper quality feels great, and it's a fairly smooth paper since it's hot pressed cotton paper, and the book also lays flat when open, which is really nice. And now I'm going to color swatch everything in my larger watercolor journal here. This paper is also 300 GSM and 100% cotton hot press watercolor paper, so it should be very similar to the notebook that Arrtx gave me. As I mentioned before, these watercolor pencils don't have any wax in them like some traditional colored pencils do, so they do lay down rather dry and scratchy, and you'll probably see my table shaking a bit as I lay down the color. After some experimenting, I started to figure out a general level of pressure I like to use with these colored pencils to provide enough pigment that they'll really pop when I add water to them. I'm coloring the heaviest on the left side and coloring a little bit lighter on the right side, but not creating as extreme of a contrast in value as I did when I swatched these on the original swatch chart that I'll show you in a little bit. I found that if I colored as lightly as I would with traditional colored pencils, that the lighter sections were almost not visible at all when water was added. And so I focused on laying down the pigments a bit heavier so they'd be easier to see on this chart. When adding water, I am coming in from the lighter side and going towards the more heavily pigmented side, which is how I was recommended to go about blending these pigments in general. If you start on the heavier pigmented side and move towards the lighter side, then a lot of the color will get pushed over and you'll completely cover up any chance you have of creating a light color. Though you'll see I sort of gave up on trying to create a value scale with each of these colors and just focused on making sure the color was nice and vibrant for my color swatch. There was plenty of trial and error with these, and I have a lot to learn still, but it's super satisfying to see these colors blend from scratchy colored pencil lines into smooth watercolor, and some of the colors were even more satisfying to watch blend than others. I did find this color swatch chart to be extremely useful because the colors on the back of the box and on the outside of each pencil don't always accurately match the true color when laid down on paper, which is common with pretty much every colored pencil and marker that I've ever tested. Here's the original swatch card, where I went really light on one side and really heavy on the other side, and you can see that these colors handle differently on each different type of paper. I really prefer how they look on the actual watercolor paper, and I think the colors pop so beautifully here. While I'm flipping to the next drawing here, you'll be able to briefly see the Skillshare course I took to get a handle on these watercolor pencils before I tested them out for you. It was a fun course and definitely helpful in beginning to understand how these watercolor pencils work. So on these pages, I have a little collage of cute desserts and sweets that I found on Pinterest. This first drawing I later realized has to be AI because I don't know any fruit that looks like a cherry but has these little leaves on it. Let me know if I'm wrong and these really exist, but either way, I thought it was a cute looking fruit, so I drew it the way I saw it, even if it might not be real. And I had a fun time picking out different drawings that would go together for this page. Here I found some cute dango bears, which I decided, of course, to turn into cats. And this is just such a classic treat that I see so frequently in kawaii art. Though in all honesty, I've never gotten a chance to try it before, so let me just allow my imposter syndrome to kick up once more since that seems to be the theme of this whole video. Next I'm drawing some little strawberries in the corner to tie all of these drawings together. I decided on strawberries because I really wanted to keep everything on this page pink and green for the most part. Then up here, I am drawing a little Swiss roll cake with a kitten sleeping on the top of it. And I got this idea from this Swiss roll picture with the little pandas on top. For this group of drawings, I wanted to try laying down all of the base colors and the shadow colors at once, and then work to blend them together with water. After practicing this technique for a while, I found that I could get smoother blends this way than how I did when I colored the cheeseburger, where I laid down and activated each color separately. And here I'm just adding a little bit more pigment directly from the pencil onto the brush to deepen some of this color where I had washed it out too much with water. Because I didn't really know what I was doing, I found I fairly frequently added too much water to an area and it would push all of the pigment out of it. So sometimes I would just come back in using the watercolor pencil directly on the brush to add a little extra pigment where it was missing. Though as you can see, sometimes it gets a bit too dark and that's just going to require more practice on my part to understand how to best use these colored pencils. I added a little bit of peach color to this white cat, and then I'm whitening up the dots in the eyes of this green kitty. And I'm using that same peach color to color in the stick, holding all of these together. For the ears and noses, I just colored them in with a darker pink color and left it as it was without activating it with water. And now I'm just coloring in the cherries or whatever this fruit is on this little cat pastry. I also don't know what kind of dessert this is, but it was so cute that I had to draw it. Overall, I really enjoyed using the red colors here, and I think they blended out super nicely. Next, I'll be creating a gradient with a pink color like you see in the picture. First, I'm activating it with water. And then to eliminate the hard line of the pink, I'm coming in from the opposite direction and pushing the pigment up and softening it so it's more of a blend. And then I'm using this peachy color again to add color to the bottom of this pastry. Here I drew the shadow back in with the colored pencil while the paper was still wet, and that worked really well for this light colored pencil. I don't think this works as well with darker pigmented colors, as you'll see me attempt later with the dark green on the matcha Swiss roll, but since this peach color was so light, it happened to work out really well here. And this is exactly how you learn, by trying out different things and seeing what works. And sometimes what works for one color does not work for all colors. So I did have a lot of fun experimenting with these colored pencils. And I apologize to those of you who actually know what you're doing when using these, but this was literally only my third time ever using them. This light beige color worked super well for the shadows, and I just left it as it was without activating it. Now I'm working on the matcha roll cake, and I'm probably not coloring it as well as I could be, but you can see how the colored pencils are a bit more dry than you may be used to with other colored pencils. But that's where the fun of the water comes in to blend away all of those dark and scratchy marks. Here I've tried adding the colored pencil directly onto the wet paper again, and as you can see, since it's a darker, more heavily pigmented color, the effect wasn't quite as subtle and cute as it was on the pastry I had previously worked on. So I just went back and forth trying to blend, starting with the lighter color and heading into the shadow, and then going back and forth. And what's really cool about these is you can keep coming back over them with more water and smoothing them out again. And they don't cauliflower or act weird, but they actually got smoother as I added more water to them. Here I was trying to blow dry this page really quickly so I could safely move on to the next color without them potentially blending into one another, but my hairdryer was a bit too extreme and blew the paint across the page. So I just grabbed a clean paintbrush and tried to wash it off the paper as much as possible, and then I dabbed it with a paper towel and it ended up removing almost all of the pigment, which is another really cool thing about these colored pencils. So I feel like in some ways, these watercolor pencils can be fairly forgiving, which is really good when you have no idea what you're doing. I'm adding some chocolate chips to the inside of this roll because I saw it in my reference picture and it sounds delicious. If I ever make a Swiss roll cake, this would be how I would do it. Next, I'm just coloring in these two strawberries, and as you'll see, I'm coloring them in roughly the same way with the same two colors, but after I add water and they dry, they'll actually look quite different from one another. So I think that's kind of fun and is something that can be really enjoyable about regular watercolors that these watercolor pencils can take on as well. A bit of unpredictability. The reds were my favorite color to blend on these pages, and I think they were really fun to work with since I was kind of able to figure out the right amount of pigment to put on the paper, as well as a decent blending technique for them. I almost feel like each color has its own tricks with this medium, so that keeps it interesting. In the future, I want to try using these watercolor pencils for solid base colors, and then after they dry, I want to come in and use some Prismacolor pencils for the details and shadows, since those are so smooth and waxy and great for blending. I think having a smooth colored base with these watercolor pencils would allow for some really beautiful results with adding blendable colored pencils on top of them. I know that look can actually be achieved with these watercolored pencils alone, so maybe I'm just cheating when I think about coloring in that way, but it sounds fun and I'm excited to try it. When I was coloring in the leaves, I accidentally picked up some red pigment on my brush from the berry and ended up transferring the color onto the leaf, and in my attempt to blot it off the page, I brought even more pigment over and made an even bigger mess. So I kept trying to add color and blend it to try to cover up the red mark. I never fully covered it up, but at some point you just have to move on. Again, I'm not really sure why Arrtx reached out to me of all people to do this review, but it was definitely a fun challenge and I really enjoyed the opportunity to try out a different medium. I feel like I learned so much with these few paintings and I look forward to exploring these watercolor pencils even more in the future. Oh, and I totally forgot to mention that there is a giveaway to win a set of these watercolored pencils. So if you're curious to try these out for yourself, definitely go check the description box and I'll explain more there about how to enter since I'm running out of time here. I really appreciate Arrtx being so willing to send out an extra set of these to one of my subscribers, and I always appreciate brands that let me try out a product and offer one to my audience as well. So thank you Arrtx for being so wonderful to work with once again. So let me know what you thought of this Draw With Me video. I've never done a Draw With Me video on its own before, but I feel like my bullet journal plan with me videos are basically Draw With Me style anyhow. And please let me know what kind of subjects you like to see drawn in Draw With Me videos. I personally really enjoy drawing food like this, so I may do that again, but I'd like to know your thoughts as well. And here are the final drawings up close. My version of the Pinterest photos that I found online, which I'll also link below. I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you in the next one.